Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. And in this video, I'm going to be attempting to do a top champs of 2021. This has been a little bit of a weird year for Marvel Contest of Champions because the top of the top this year have been absolutely incredible, but there are a lot of sort of useful champions in the middle and then some real duds at the bottom. So it was really difficult as I was going through the entire list and rating all the champions. But I did kind of find after I assigned my top 8 that I did think there was sort of like a line there of these are the top tier champs from 2021, and then everybody else was just sort of a tier below in terms of their utility. So in order to keep the video not too long, I am going to keep it just to a top 8. And another caveat, I'm not considering Sigil Scarlet Witch for this year because I do think she's not available to every player, so she's not going to make the list even though she is a pretty cool champion. I made sure if I didn't have these champs to play around with that I consulted some other YouTubers and some other summoners who are pretty familiar with these champs. I also did a lot of footage watching on YouTube and some guides and things like that. So, you know the drill. This is my opinion. I do encourage debate. If you can leave respectful comments in the comments section, I will certainly reply. I love having these kinds of discussions. I know that there is a little bit of leeway with these types of lists, and as long as we all understand that and know that this is a little bit of fun, we're going to continue on with our top 8 champs of 2021. So coming in at number 8, we have Odin. And Odin's going to have a lasting presence in this game regardless of this list, and even if he wasn't a standalone champion that can fend for himself, because of those pre-fights. I mean, these buffs can really augment champs like Ghost, Red Goblin, Silver Surfer, and Angela for a variety of reasons, but they can also make just about anyone completely resistant to shock effects. Especially as a 6-star, these abilities go up even more, and it's pretty incredible. But let's look at him as a standalone champ, because assuming he's going to be making teams for these pre-fights, can he hold his own as a standalone champ? And the answer is yes. And his main utility that he has is True Strike. So right off of the special one, he can get a True Strike buff. It's easy to maintain for the entire fight, and that's going to be countering auto block and evade, and it also goes through resistances like physical resistance and armor. So that alone is huge. But if you make use of his Odin Force charges, which you get after knocking them down a couple times, you can throw a special one. It puts a bunch of unique buffs on yourself. If you then throw a heavy with Odin Force, it's going to also give you a stack of energized buffs per unique buff that you have on yourself. So at that point, you have True Strike up for the rest of the fight, and you have these massive energized buffs that are going to allow you to basically chain as many specials as you want with amazing combat power gain. And right there, you have a great champion. That alone is great, but then if it's a longer form fight, you can get to your special 3, which doubles up your buffs and it gives you an extender buff. And then if you build up to a big special 2, it's going to do an insane amount of burst damage. And you've probably seen this damage rotation. It does come into play even in medium length fights, but for long form content, I think it does have a lot of potential. And one of the greatest things that they did was improve his sort of Odin sleep mechanic. It used to be that you lost the fury and the armor every time he didn't have Odin sleep, which requires you resting for a fight and letting another champ take a fight. But right now, even without Odin sleep, he's about as good as he was before with Odin sleep. And then the Odin sleep just gives him an extra aptitude buff, which, it's another buff for his abilities, and it just makes him hit harder. So I really think he's a super viable champion, and part of the reason he made this list is because I know he's going to be used as a synergy piece for some champs and for his pre-fights. But additionally, I do think he's going to have a very relevant place in this game, and he does deserve the top spot in these top 8. And I am going to link a guide created by DLL. This is a full guide to the champion. It's going to go into much more detail than I am today, and you can check that out if you want to learn a little bit more. So next up, we have number 7, and this one's going to Mr. Negative. So Mr. Negative was the first science champ of the year that I would say brought forth what I consider a new generation of science champions. He has something that is fairly common among new science champions today, which is immunity to Nullify, Fate Seal, and Stagger. But on top of those core abilities, he has this new ability where he can dash back and convert a buff into light energy. And this isn't quite the same as buff immunity, which we've seen, but in certain fights it can kind of work in the same way. And also building light energy, it's an important currency that you need to gain damage and some more abilities as the fight progresses. So most fights that you have with him is about building your light energy and then throwing a big special 2. If you build up your light energy ahead of time and then you anticipate the special 2 with a heavy charge, you will automatically evade, convert it to dark energy, and then when you chain in your special 2, it's going to do a huge amount of degen damage, as well as put a couple petrifies on them, so you can go in right after and be pretty aggressive, not have to worry about any kind of passive power gain, finish them off that way. It's a pretty beautiful rotation. Additionally, his Sig ability gives him a little bit more damage output, and even more importantly, it unlocks a whole new utility. He's already kind of resistant to degen, but this will allow you to heal off of degeneration. And even at low Sig, I've seen summoners like MP Blaze take the Starburst lane in map 7, back when that was more of a deal, with a low Sig Mr. Negative, and he's still completely regenning and ending with like a full yellow bar based off of that Sig ability. So at high Sig, he's like laughing at champs like Mojo and stuff like that. It's a little bit of an icing on the cake ability, and he has so much utility even unawakened that I think he would still make this list, but degen countering is pretty huge in my book, and if you can get him awakened and higher Sig, it's pretty incredible. I know I'm missing some things here, but I will also say that his special 3 has potential for either a big burst of damage, a long delirium, which is going to help control combat power rate in the future, and you can also convert light energy into a big regeneration. It kind of reminds me of some champs that, you know, have a big regen off of the special 3, like Warlock, for example. You don't always use the special 3, but it is a pretty beneficial thing in a long fight to get some of your health back. Pretty cool. So he does have all these key characteristics that we want to see in a science champ, but in addition to that, his ability to remove buffs and create that into resources for his kit is pretty awesome. And because of that, I do put him a step above some other nullify immune science champs. In my opinion, that's where he lands, number 7. Next up, we have number 6, and this one is going to go to Strife. Now, for some reason, Strife is a little bit of a controversial guy in this community, and I think I figured out why. I think it all had to do with the overhype. You know, when he first came out, it was like, oh, this is Mutant Aegon and your new Abyss option. But I think on top of that, it's also that the Mutant class is just so strong that he doesn't quite fit in at the tippy top of the class. And because of that, you know, when you compare him to the Mutant class as a whole, he may not be a top champ, but when you compare him to the whole contest, he really brings so much utility that I think he does deserve this spot. So just quickly, I'm not going to really be talking too much about his Abyss usage and his long form content stuff, because I do think that is fairly well understood. Aside from Aegon, he is one of the best lane clearers, and he's also pretty viable against the Collector, which as a main lane clearer in Abyss is a pretty huge plus. But to talk about his utility, I do want to give some credit to one of my friends from Vega's Discord server. He's also a new recruit for SSX, so congrats, man. Welcome to the team. His name is Nerd, and he does have a really cool YouTube channel as well with some great war gameplay, so I am going to link his channel. But I asked him, can you convince me that he deserves to be on this list? And he's like, wow, it's tough to say yes for sure, but then he started listing all the utility, and I was pretty impressed at the encyclopedic knowledge that this guy had about all the utility of how this guy can work in content that isn't long form content. So we're going to briefly go through everything. His psionic blasts, which come on medium attacks and heavy attacks, I believe, it has sort of that OR and Havoc type ability where you take no damage from things on contact like thorns, but in addition to that, it counters evade. So right there, thorns and evade counter on most of your basic hits, pretty cool. His 4th light attack has a concussion, and it also has an interesting ability where you can counter unblockable attacks right after that. You can just sort of block them straight up. And that's very powerful, but on top of that, his telepathic charges that you've been building throughout the fight can remove unstoppable effects. So like, let's pause for a second here. He has utility to deal with evade, unstoppable, unblockable, and thorns. Like, obviously there's a little bit of nuance here. Like, you can't do all at once and make it all fly, but like, if you know what you're doing with this champ before you go into a specific fight, you can counter all that. Like, that seems really powerful to me. Additionally, a big part of his damage are passive shocks. They're a big source of damage. They don't interact with debuff shrugging and things like that. And plus, shock immunity isn't that prevalent. So this is great for that, map 8 lane where you need shock. Additionally, selective time stream, thunderstruck, things like that. The other thing is he has ability to miss. Like, we know other champs like Ghost and Kitty Pryde and Tigra and stuff that have the ability to miss and counter. That's an incredible ability that avoids you taking block damage, and he does get big benefits off of his heavy after he does that. So Nerd gave me this list of lanes in Act 6 that Strife can take, and I was so impressed. I can't list the whole thing, but it was node stuff like Aspect of War, the one that had selective time stream and pull, stuff like Footloose because of the evade and unstoppable, any kind of evade really, any kind of thorns. It was just such a big list. And looking back at Act 6 for a mid-game player, that is a really important piece of content you have to get through. This list of top 8 is not just for like the top end game players. For anyone progressing, having access to this utility plus ramping up throughout a quest is pretty darn good. I wasn't much of a Strife believer until I started looking into him a little bit more on this guide. And I do have to say, like, the totality of his kit, and then you add like the APOC and Cable synergies, I just think he has to make this list. Like, he may not be everyone's favorite, he may not be going to war super often, even though he does fit with some synergies, but I think he's that good that he deserves the number 6 slot. All right, so now we're on to top 5. And coming in at number 5, I have Null, the god of symbiotes himself. And I feel like we haven't seen a lot of Null gameplay yet, but my prediction is that when he becomes a little more widely available, the potential for him to go higher on this list is actually going to be even greater. So I think top 5 is where he is now, but he actually could go higher based on people learning to play him and showing us some footage. He's definitely a recoil tree enhanced, maybe even dependent champion, but there is a lot more going on than just being a suicide friendly champ. He has these living abyss debuffs that are very easy to apply. You can just do them mostly with heavies and mediums, and each time you do that, it removes armor. And also these mediums and heavies have true accuracy, so right there he's a really good counter to evasion and auto block, which as a cosmic champion, that's good. It's not a full true strike, but it's pretty close to it, and it's not really a buff either. It's just like a passive ability on his mediums and heavies. In a short fight, you can basically activate Corruption by throwing a special 1 at some point, and once you get into Corruption, things start going crazy. Your living abyss debuffs will turn into armor breaks, so that's more damage right there. They suffer reduced combat power rate. Your light attacks start doing big red damage. I think technically it's like an instant bleed, so as long as they're not bleed immune, you're good. You can basically just chain special 1s and destroy your opponent in sort of a shorter fight. But if it's a longer fight, you can also build to a big special 2. It's going to be doing a ton of direct damage and putting more armor breaks on them, and it's pretty incredible. Another benefit of Corruption is that a combo that ends in a medium or heavy attack will actually, if you do a heavy attack during it, or if you end a combo with a medium, you get a little bit of regen. It's a little bit like a lifesteal, and then that also applies a degen debuff. So like, even if they're bleed immune, you can get the degens off of it. So basically what I'm trying to say is Corruption is easy to activate and it's super OP. He also has degen resistance, poison and bleed resistance, so that's one of the reasons he's so friendly to the recoil tree. And any node that has some kind of degen, like there aren't really other cosmics that have degen resistance, so that's pretty cool. The special 1 does the Corruption for 10 seconds, but if you have a longer fight, you can wait till you have a lot of living abyss and you can do a special 3, and then you get a 25-second Corruption for these longer matchups. It's pretty incredible. So like I said, we haven't seen too much of him yet, but I get the sense just from playing along with my 4-star a little bit, like you can go into a fight with Null and not even know how he works and things will just happen. I like champs like that, but then when you learn his kit, there's a lot there. There's stacking debuffs, true accuracy, combat power reduction, burst damage, just resistances, recoil friendliness, armor removal, armor breaks straight up. It just goes on and on and on, and then you can really go to town in a longer fight, like I said, waiting for that special 3 and unlocking immense damage. I am going to link in the description a recent video by Vega because I think a lot of people know about the long form content, But Vega brought in Null to an off-season war, and it was pretty impressive how much damage he could do even without access to all of his specials, and additionally countering things like Chitinous Thorns because of the armor removal. And it was just an interesting video to me, so I think you should check it out to kind of see like a really casual use of Null and how good this guy is. So for me, he's a pretty solid number 5. He has potential to go up. I can't wait till this guy ends up in a featured crystal, because he's going to be one of my top targets for sure. All right, coming in at number 4, we have Spiderman 2099. And this is a real interesting case of a character who came out without making a big splash, but then over time, over the months after, he really gained a lot of popularity. And I'm in a pretty cool position because I was near sort of the ground zero when his popularity began to skyrocket. Most of that came from one of my friends and battle group members, Strands, who started using his newly ranked Spiderman 2099, and he gave some of his footage to our friends over at 4Loki. And before we knew it, Karate Mike and Legacy were making videos of basically them doing the same things that Strands was, and they both ranked it and really kind of skyrocketed his popularity overnight. So this whole thing started with countering Mojo bosses, which he does very well. Obviously, if you don't know his kit, he gets this resistance to damage of 75% less damage taken when going up against True Strike, and we all know that the boss node has True Strike. Additionally, he has the ability to not proc buffs, so against someone like Mojo, he's never going to get the hater buffs, he's never going to have buffs expiring, will never degen. It just becomes a joke of a fight. But what we've found, especially in our battle group as we've been trying to path this Spider-Man 2099 as well, is he has so much additional utility to just the big boss fight that he really merits being brought into the quest to not just take the boss, but to continue going. And it really all has to do with the Wither debuff and the ability to not proc buffs. They're very simple abilities, but they are super important. I'm going to link a recent video I made. I did like a less than 5-minute review on him where I go over this all in detail. But basically, Wither is off the special 2. It reduces ability power gain by 125%. You can stack it multiple times to reverse things like advanced power gain and things like that. And the ability to not proc buffs, it has all the benefits that like the Nullify immune champs have. So that's like Buffet, Pilfer, Power Snack, things like that. But additionally, it goes up against Spite, right? Because Spite isn't a Nullify ability. That is like having a buff on yourself is going to proc Spite. Similar with fighting Dormammu and Mojo. They don't necessarily nullify your buffs to do big damage against you. They just wait for your buffs to expire. And also Mystic Dispersion in general. As a buff expires, which can even happen to a Nullify immune, then you get screwed with the power gain. But if you're buff immune, this doesn't happen. And additionally, he's able to pause his own debuffs, which I think is really cool. They take the ability to not get buffs and turn it into debuff pausing for this champion. Really fits in with the science class. I love it. And the other thing is, if he's at high sig and you run him with the anti-venom synergy, he becomes a complete shutdown champ for some scenarios, because at high sig, when he starts with a Wither, he's going to have massive combat power rate. You can get right back to a special 2, stack another Wither, and then the game is over. Like, there's no way for some champs to gain power. He can reverse kinetic transference and things like that as well. It's a really, really cool ability. Big red damage. The ruptures add up as you go in the fights. The more debuffs on them, the harder your special 2 hits. I guess what I'm trying to say is he's just a super useful tool. I feel like he's very easy to use, and he's not like a path clearer for just general content, unless if you want to have a little bit of fun. But if it's one of the matchups where he works, he's one of the best, and he's similar enough to Mr. Negative, but also different enough that I think both of them merit a little bit of discussion for where they fall here. But I think his ability to counter Mystics and counter Nullify and ability power gain is just so huge for this game that he does deserve a spot this high. He's my number 4 on the list, and I'll stand by that. Spider-Man 2099, number 4. Okay, so now we're on to the top 3. I think you kind of know who these 3 are, and it'll just be a question of the order. So let's get right into it. Number 3 is going to be ShangChi. And he really is an incredible skill champion. And the reason I like him so much is he basically does everything you want a skill champ to do, and he does it relatively easily. He has a variety of combinations that proc different wushu strikes. These can apply a slow, which stops unstoppable and evade. This can make him go unblockable, so there you go, countering auto block. He can cleanse, lots of debuffs, so there you go, purifying debuffs. One of them has a stun on the opponent, so you can do even more damage. You can stun them through the block. And basically the way you weave these all together makes him a very flexible and interesting champion with like lots of different utility that can be used throughout different points of the fight. And then of course his heavy attack will reset all of these wushu strikes, so you can just like rinse repeat. I do think though that ShangChi does require a little bit more understanding and skill than most people would give him credit for. He's not one of those champions that just has like a magical rotation. Like, I'm going to go into this fight and do this combination of inputs and win. You need to go into the fight knowing a strategy. You need to know what you're, giving priority to. Is cleanse the most important thing? When am I going to throw my heavy so that I can get cleanse back? Or what do I need to do to keep the longest slow possible? Things like that. But if you understand his kit, it reminds me a little bit of CGR, where you have to have like situational awareness and know when to reset, when to go through your judgments. With him, it's wushu strikes instead of judgments. If you have a good game plan and you know the specific combos you need to do, when to reset, and then when to throw your big special 2 for the finishing blow, you're going to have a very powerful tool to use. And of course, you've seen the outrageous numbers. There are ways, with the special 3 and whatnot to get lots of chi charges. And then because you get the guaranteed crits and the increased crit damage off of the special 2, you can literally do millions of damage off of the special 2. And it's a little bit of a meme. But in realistic scenarios, you can kind of just play him and do the wushus and get the chi charges. And you can still have like a finishing blow of a special 2 that's going to easily take out a war opponent. So, you do see those outrageous numbers, but even in a normal fight, the special 2 is a great finishing move. And if you have the awareness with this champion of when to throw the special 2 to eliminate the rest of the health, you can really just nuke down an opponent that you've had control over for the entire time. So ShangChi, really, really good design. One of my favorite skill champions that I don't own. If I did own him, he would go straight to rank 3 because I do value him that much, and he's just a great champ. All right, top 2. Number 2 is going to go to Kitty Pryde. So let's talk about Kitty Pryde. There are basically 2 Kitty Prydes, right? There's the straight out of the gate one, and then there's the synergy one. But on her base kit, she, I think, would easily make the top 5 on this list, maybe still even top 2. Basically, when you don't have the synergies, a skilled player can take the unsynergized one and do incredible things. But once you have her synergized, she's easily top 1 or top 2 because even less skill is needed. You can just do incredible things, incredible damage, not take damage, phase through projectiles, and it's absolutely outrageous. But I do think the reason she's not number 1 is because there are 2 different champs. Like I'm saying, you do need the synergies for her to reach her full potential. Her at her best is possibly the best champ of this year, though. I will just say that. So she has Incinerate immunity. When she takes Incinerate damage, it gives her a benefit. She has this prowess attack bonus meter that goes up. It looks like a little thermometer, kind of like Human Torch. You basically want that thermometer to go up. And it's fairly easy to build this meter. You can throw a special 3 in a longer fight or a few special 1s. As you incinerate the opponent and you keep those up, then your temperature, whatever you want to call it, goes up. It's nice to have the Incinerate damage as well, but essentially then you start building your prowess from intercepting and parrying, and you can time it so that your phase leads into a few misses. You get some bonus prowess stacks above the 20 that you've already built. Unleash a big special 2. It has close to guaranteed crits because the crit rate is going to go up. Incredible damage. High crit rating, massive prowess bonus. It's all there. And you've seen the incredible numbers. You've seen the gameplay. And that's just Kitty right out of the gate. Like, she has the phase. Even unawakened, she has 80% less damage during phase. But once you awaken her, she basically gets like the Hood Ghost synergy, where she takes 100% damage reduction while phased. And, you know, phasing is when you're running into the opponent and not taking damage. The other thing the Awaken ability does that's really cool is it allows a chance for the Incinerates to reapply when they expire, which is really nice. That will help you build your temperature meter thing up a little bit if those just keep refreshing. It takes a little RNG, but they will often reapply. And then the other niche part of her SIG ability before we go on is basically if a miss is prevented by some reason, like if there's vigilance or if you're fighting Daredevil and you start getting hit, then you will have a huge defensive combat power rate. So you just start gaining power like crazy. And since you are phased, you won't take any damage from those hits as well. So most people don't use this intentionally, but it's a nice safety net where you gain more power and don't take any damage. And then just in general, phasing, I've said it with Strife, like phasing in this game is just insane. You can just dash right at them, avoid annoying projectiles, and if you have your special 2 ready, you just tack on a ton of damage and you go. But let's talk about these crazy synergies. I do think I've talked to a couple Kitty players, and the Tigra synergy is probably the more important one in terms of play style, because you go unblockable on phase when you have 10 stacks of prowess, which is pretty easy to build up to 10 early in the fight. And this just makes her a lot easier to play, because if they throw down your block, you dash into them, you're still going to connect. You can just keep going in and out, keep breaking their block, not taking any damage, and it just makes things a little bit safer, a little bit easier. But the Ghost synergy is quite powerful for extra damage, because those bonus prowesses that you get when you phase in will actually gain even more. So you can like very easily stack like 15 extra above the 20 cap if you miss like 3 hits basically. And then if you throw a special one right on time, this prowess bonus is going to be pretty noticeable with the extra damage. So, you know, here we're talking about 2 other super powerful champs in the game, Ghost and Tigra, running with Kitty. We have this absolute bonkers team. Another underrated synergy is the Emma Frost one, where she becomes immune to reverse controls. It's kind of like the old Mysterio synergy, and I do really like Emma Frost. Emma Frost gets some nice attack bonuses from this as well. So bottom line with Kitty, if you've run the synergy team, she's a borderline broken champion. There's lots of footage with her on YouTube taking fights that she has absolutely no business taking, but even without the synergy team, or if you just bring Tigra, she's a pretty incredible champ. She's got the immunity and she has the phasing ability. Even unawakened, she's pretty incredible. So for me, she's probably my top target moving forward. I have Ghost, I have Tigra. I can see some really, really beautiful teams using all of them, and she's just incredible. So Kitty, number 2. And I think no surprise here, number 1 is going to go to the Overseer, who, no, just kidding. Number 1 is Hercules. And, you know, I knew that these two would be Herc and Kitty. I do firmly believe, though, that Herc is overall a better champion. I mean, Kitty at her peak is absolutely crazy with the skill cap, with everything. But the thing about Herc is that he doesn't need the synergies at all to be good. And there's something about his design that just fits together. You have to do certain missions to get your feats in order to ramp up in a single fight and a single quest, but they are so safe and easy to get these feats that I just love playing Hercules. You're rewarded for intercepts, but there's something about his animations, especially with these special intercepts, where there's this really big window for you to intercept. And then additionally, if they have the Infuriate debuff on themselves, they're going to be more aggressive. They play right into what you want them to do. If you backdraft and do a light, it just makes intercepts safer. And then the other way to build feats is with his heavy attack against a non-stunned opponent. He has a very long heavy animation, so even if you stun them and you throw a heavy, you know that you're going to get 1 feat off of it. And additionally, it has a really long range with that kick that he does, so you can heavy counter other heavy attacks or specials quite easily with him to build your feats that way. The damage potential, once you get a few feats and you just do a special 1 and a special 2 while intercepting, it's immense, even without the recoil tree. But he gains a huge bonus from having the recoil tree on, and that's mostly because his buffs that he gets are crit modifiers, right? It's like crit damage and critical rating. So anytime you have champs like that who modify their crit, when you have a big attack increase on top of that, you're going to see a huge difference. Like think Corvus and Ghost, for example. So when you turn on Liquid Courage, you actually get a 45% attack increase instead of the normal 30. So if you're running full recoil tree, in addition to the recoil special damage that you get, you also get 75% additional damage from recoil tree, which is absolutely insane. And he has resistances to both of those debuffs, so you're essentially healing all fight. And we haven't even talked about immortality yet. I mean, he took Corvus's cheat death mode and made it an even more broken cheat death. I suppose the only way that it can fail is if like the buff gets extinguished, or if there's some kind of ability accuracy like Assassin's Range. But most of the time, this is like a free gimme, right? It's a long immortality. If you're running recoil tree, you actually heal up a little bit. It's just borderline broken, this champion. When they first described him in the Summoner's Choice, they made it seem like he was going to be some crazy ramp-up champ, like, Cull Obsidian or Airwalker or something like that. So a lot of us were worried. But then you look at the way he performs in fight number 1, and it's incredible right out of the gate. I really like also the ability they gave him when the opponent has armor, he gets extra red damage. It's sort of like an alternative to armor break. So, if you're fighting someone like Nimrod, who is sort of immune to the effects of armor break, it doesn't matter because you're just going to get the benefit of the extra red numbers for him having armor in the first place. So bottom line with Hercules, he rewards you for skilled play, which I do like in a champ, but at the same time, he has these amazing animations and his abilities make risky playstyle less risky. And even if you slow play him, he's got absolutely amazing numbers. The other utility I haven't talked about is the True Sense off of his special 1. This counters auto block and miss. Red Goblin is another example of this utility, but it's way harder for him to activate it. So anytime there's some kind of miss, just throw a special 1, keep chaining special 1s. Hercules has got it in the bag. Additionally, Hercules special 3 gives you an indestructible buff, so you can kind of like YOLO and push them to a special 3, and you will survive their special 3. And additionally, you get a feat for standing back up after the knockdown. I don't see a lot of people playing them that way, but it is technically a way you can build feats. And if there's some kind of crazy power gain and you have a special 3, you can save yourself in before you even get to the immortality phase and whatnot. So yeah, Hercules, I think no one would argue he deserves that number 1 spot. And of course, there were some champs that I left off, so I'm not going to really do honorable mentions, but I do want to just name a couple and tell you why I didn't include them. We had some pretty big tech champs this year, namely Penny Parker, Nimrod, and Silver Centurion. I do think they all kind of come in at about the same level. They all have different utility. Like Silver Centurion doesn't crit. He has the passive damage, like with the shocks and the plasmas and stuff. And additionally, he has some cool immunities. Penny can build her damage pretty high. She has some really nice safety nets, some good immunities as well. Nimrod can really counter mutants as good as any other champion. There's a lot to him as well, but they all kind of made it into that like number 9, 10, 11 type spot for me. So I decided to leave them off the list because if I included all of them, this would get too long. This is already going long enough. And I did make a joke about the Overseer before, but I will also say he did barely miss this list. And it was just because the 2 other science champions that I brought up, I think are slightly better to him. He does have the crazy retaliation damage and the nullify, stagger, fate seal immunity like they do, but he doesn't really have a way to deal with power gain except for taunt. And additionally, if there's not some kind of nullify immunity or retaliation happening, I think he takes a little bit longer to get together. However, if you need like a big bruiser who's a nullify immune champion, he's absolutely incredible. He has probably higher damage than those 2 in some scenarios, and he's also tankier. So if you have Overseer and not the other 2, or even if you like him better, please do rank him up. There's some really cool gameplay on YouTube about him already, and I do think he is a really good champion. He just has a little bit too much overlap with the other science champions, and he barely missed the lists. There were other good champs this year. I think Anti-Venom is pretty good. Kraven looks decent, but we really haven't seen enough for me to make an opinion. Icarus was bugged, so it's a little hard to see how good he is. Cersei's got that really interesting glancing mechanic and a way to, spend a couple bars of power to get a lot of attack. I do think they're all interesting. And then of course there's some big duds like, you know, Super Scroll and Psycho Man and whatnot. But overall it was a pretty interesting year. We saw the game go in a new direction. We saw some new abilities, and we saw at least 2 completely OP champs and at least a few others that are kind of changing the meta in the way that we counter some of the annoying stuff in the game. So anyway, I'd love to hear what you think about this list. Please let me know your opinion, of course, respectfully in the comments. I'll be right there to answer any comments and have a discussion with you. Share this with your other fellow summoners. Thank you so much for your support. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for checking it out, and have a good night.